Towering above the tree-lined streets in the Fort Greene section of Brooklyn stands a great edifice of granite, steel, and limestone. A monument to the educational ideals of one man. Dr. Albert Colston, a visionary and educator, had a dream. Establish a high school with a heavy concentration of STEM courses: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. A school with parallel paths, leading either to college or a technical career in industry. On October 18, 1918, he presented a paper to the Brooklyn Engineers Club, recommending the creation of a school with a technical curriculum. And in the spring of 1922, the Board of Education approved the establishment of Brooklyn Technical High School.
Today, Brooklyn Tech opens the door to cutting-edge 21st century fields of study. It's a vast array of 18 majors, including instructional components in software engineering, robotics, digital media, biological sciences, aerospace engineering, finance, law and society, and 2 programs that culminate with doctorates from Long Island University, pharmacy and advanced health professions.
The history of Brooklyn Tech is so rich because it has evolved over the past 100 years from being created when technology was in its infancy to today when it's much more advanced, a school that was built upon the belief that it's important that we learn how to apply knowledge rather than just learn theory. And we have moved from the beginning roots to being, I believe, one of the very special high schools in this country. As one of our former principals said, we are preparing students for careers that do not yet exist by preparing them to be able to face the challenges and be equipped to be able to apply what they've learned.
Hey everybody, and welcome to a very special episode of Frank About Health. First of all, this is my 40th year of having graduated from that school in 1985. And my guest today, David Yang, is class of 1984, but both of us are definitely involved in healthcare in various ways. All of you know from this podcast, Frank About Health, I have spoken about a myriad of topics related about healthcare, from epilepsy, mental health, diabetes, cancer, COVID, the list goes on. And of course, you all may remember we've had some alumni from Brooklyn Tech on the show as well. The Honorable Tanya Kennedy, Solange Pilizota. We've had David Lee, as well as Alex Yaroslavsky, and more about them later on. But this episode is devoted to paying tribute not just to Brooklyn Tech, but also to the individuals that Brooklyn Tech impacted to really focus on careers in health, whether it was practicing health or engineering the tools to apply health, or, for example, host a podcast on healthcare. So that all being said, I will issue a standard disclaimer that this is a celebration episode. We are not providing any information that will be controversial in any way. If you find that anything we discuss is upsetting to you or is not worthy of your time, then this is not the show for you. I'm just being frank about the fact that I'm hoping all my tech friends and followers and family members are watching this show right now so that we can celebrate homecoming together. Because as you all may be aware, today's episode was to feature Dr. Marshall Runge, who, due to chaos and confusion that continues to exist in our healthcare space, he will be here next week. But in order to subdue the chaos, the opportunity came to celebrate Brooklyn Tech, which has been a foundation for me to really enter the STEM fields and ultimately apply my STEM education into healthcare. So now, David, it's your moment. By all means, I've already announced your year and everything. I'd like you to unmute your audio and just introduce yourself out loud and tech proud.
Okay, great. Thanks, Frank. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Yep, as Frank said, I am also a Brooklyn Tech alumni, 1 year older than Frank, graduated in '84. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and had heard about Brooklyn Tech during my grade school years, and was very excited to take the tech test and was very excited to get in. And the very first day of Brooklyn Technical High School for me was a pivotal moment, because that very first day was when I met my wife. As it turns out, my wife and I had zero period at the time. It was honors English, and we obviously had no idea what the life that we were about to embark upon. But many years later, we got married. We were friends throughout the Brooklyn Tech years. And yeah, and so she and we now live in Southern California. We have two wonderful daughters. This is a live screen, so you can see we have blue skies right now. My pomegranate tree is starting to grow in, so we're very happy and excited about that.
Very nice.
So just I'm going to very briefly go through. So after Brooklyn Tech, so at Brooklyn Tech, I actually took was one of the chemistry majors. It was one of the 10 courses that you had to take once you were in your junior year. You selected from among 10 different courses, and chemistry at that time was by far the most popular one. Of our 1,200 graduates, approximately 250 were actually chem majors. Didn't know a lot about what I was getting into, except that it sounded like it was exciting and fun. Wound up pursuing that at Brooklyn College. So I stayed in Brooklyn for college. Many of my friends and schoolmates went far and wide. I actually stayed in Brooklyn, went to Brooklyn College, and then wound up getting my PhD at Emory University in Atlanta. Now, this was in 1988 when I went to Atlanta, Emory, and I actually studied something that was about as far removed from healthcare as possible. It was literally studying the atmosphere of Titan, one of the moons of Saturn. So it was a very interesting project, because we had just gotten past the Voyager missions, which explored Jupiter and Saturn. And there was this hypothesis that there actually may be life on Titan, one of the moons of Saturn. And that hypothesis persists today. And in fact, I believe next year or in the next few years, we're going to send another probe back out there.
Wow.
Nevertheless, got my degree in gas phase kinetics. And a funny thing happened along the way, which is the Cold War ended. So that was important, because a lot of this fundamental research was funded by the government. It was DOE, Department of Energy, DOD, Department of Defense. And so there were some military applications to some of the work that I was doing, but a lot of that funding basically evaporated. So we actually had two choices. One was to move to North Korea, because they were trying to fund new missiles. You know, that was a possibility. We probably would have been welcome there. Not a very savory choice. But the other one was to pivot to apply some of the physical chemistry techniques to life sciences. And my very first healthcare project was building a system to sequence the human genome. So back in the 1980s and 90s, there was a huge project to sequence the human genome. So as many of you know, DNA is our genetic material, and it's really only 4 letters. A, G, C, T is how we abbreviate it. But this encyclopedia of 4 billion characters is what defines Frank, defines me, it defines, you know, all the people that we know, with very, very minute differences. And the problem at the time is we had no idea what the right sequence is. What is the sequence of the letters that creates the different people? So at the time, the government funded a multi-billion-dollar project that, in my opinion, has been one of the most spectacularly successful projects initiated by any government, maybe second only to landing on the moon. But the ability now to sequence the human genome went from taking years to taking days, from costing hundreds of millions of dollars to, I believe that right now you can have your genome sequenced for about $3,000.
Wow.
So I'm going to go into more detail a little bit, but that's how I got involved in the healthcare industry, because I use a technique called laser-induced fluorescence that was basically invented at Stanford University by Professor Zaire to actually do the sequencing of the human genome. So I think that I like to say that I contributed, 0.1000001% to the grand effort, because we actually built one of the critical tools to be able to do that.
Nice. Very nice.
After that, I was involved in a myriad of different techniques around healthcare, including protein analysis, cellular analysis, but I've really had an affinity to DNA. And probably my goal of this whole long-winded story is, first of all, talking about my favorite subject, which is me, but second, to point out that a STEM education does not necessarily mean that what you learn is what you're going to do forever. A STEM education is to teach you to learn so that you can adapt to the new competencies that are required. As Matt Mandry said, it's to prepare us for the job that doesn't exist yet.
Yes.
And so for the last 30 or so years, that's what I've been doing. I've been working on, I think of myself as a medical devices expert with enough information about hematology, DNA analysis, protein analysis to get myself in trouble. So,
well, I would venture to say that I followed the similar pathway, because when I went to Brooklyn Tech, I just didn't want to go to my zone school in New York City, which today is a homeless shelter, to say the least.
Oh, really?
However, that being said, I only knew that I loved mathematics. That was it. Okay, so I started with what I knew. And there was one specific woman there who, rest her soul, Elizabeth Scabara, who handpicked me in the summer program in the class in the summer of '82, because I had missed the admissions test to get into Brooklyn Tech by 4 points.
Oh.
And thanks to her, and because of my elevated math knowledge, I was taking trigonometry in the 9th grade. And at that time, we had the junior high school system, not the middle school. So you can enter Brooklyn Tech in the 10th, which is what I did. And because of all that advanced math, she selected me into the program. I was a J sophomore, and I just accelerated through, ending up being the second class of the Math Science Institute, because we all had to choose majors. But to me, I didn't want to do architecture, or technical drawing. I wanted to do mathematics and really engineer it or understand it analytically, and then foster my college education. But we're now ready for our first break. So I guess you just did a nice segue, because what we're showing is a reunion of sorts, class of '84 with class of '85, but at the same time showing that while this is Frank About Health, or any kind of healthcare modality like the one that you've explored in your career, has to come from some form of taking the tools and techniques that you're given and map them out to make them work for you ultimately. And that is kind of the secret of what Brooklyn Tech's educational system is about. So more on that when we return right here on this episode of Frank About Health on TalkRadio.nyc, our YouTube channel, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitch. We'll be back in a few.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on TalkRadio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on TalkRadio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on TalkRadio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. As I was just saying towards our first break, I was mentioning to David that, Brooklyn Tech in itself today has become a very highly respected institution, not just because of STEM education, but the recent innovations in artificial intelligence. And also, as you heard, there are people now majoring in law and society, in finance, things that were not available when both of us went to Brooklyn Tech. It was your traditional architecture, aerospace, industrial design, graphic communications. I believe they introduced the Math Science Institute and biomedical sciences at that particular year when I was graduating. But the thing was is I always thought of Brooklyn Tech as the place to become an engineer. And so what I had learned with my technical knowledge as well as my mathematics or love of mathematics is I guess I go into business. So hence I went to NYU's Stern School of Business and I had a nice 4-year education there, but something was always missing. It was that drive and that passion that I had to be a DJ, to be in entertainment. And of course, I think I even told you this privately yesterday, if I had known then what I knew now, I would have instead of gone the traditional route and ended up a banker at Citibank for a year and a half, I would have ended up at Sony Music Entertainment, where I did spend 10 years of my life after the fact. So I seem to have followed a pattern where I fall into what I'm meant to do, but at least I'm aware of my skill set, my tools, and I always give credence to Brooklyn Tech for giving me the foundation of recognizing my assets, but still needing to learn as I go through life. Probably my epilepsy has been a reason for the delay. I don't know. I mean, there's neurological differences in all of us, but yet it could be the secret sauce because when I do find what I need to be doing, it actually is an explosive growth period for me. So maybe that's the kind of career that I was destined to have. But again, as I was saying earlier, I don't think that kind of life would have been given to me unless I had the foundation of Brooklyn Technical High School. So I would say the theme of our last section was that if anyone is building a legacy, like you built your family through Brooklyn Tech, it stems, it's metaphorically saying, it stems from connection and connecting with each of us. And I'm really glad that that school is very big because there's so many people to meet throughout your 4 years and beyond. Simultaneously, I would like to now take it for the theme of this moment, which is more about we have so much chaos going on in this country. Now, this has been the theme of various episodes of Frank About Health since early April. But I think that you and I had a very heartfelt conversation yesterday where we were able to see how Brooklyn Tech is able to give us the skill set to manage this chaos and turn it into opportunity. So that being said, why don't you share more about how, while you were going through your development in your career, what opportunities have you been able to discover during this time when there's just so much chaos going on? Oh, you have to unmute first. Okay.
There we go. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, as we all know, these are chaotic times. Sometimes are more chaotic than others. Um, where there's chaos, there is risk, there's opportunity. I've been told that the Chinese character for crisis is danger and opportunity. And so, I have no doubt that as a nation, we will come out through all this chaos stronger. And having rooted in STEM education, I think those of us in STEM education actually have the ability to perhaps come out a little bit stronger because we are okay, one person's opinion,
Sure.
but we tend, I think,
That's
to
your
see
disclaimer.
yeah, that's my disclaimer. So, but we tend to see what could be rather than what is or
Right.
what was. All the things that could be. I think back to when I was at Tech and we had a class called computer chemistry. It was taught on a blackboard because we did not have computers. So this is what could be back in 1982 and 83 on what is the future for chemistry at that time without actually having the devices. These are things that you can do. And so So before directly answering the question, one of the things that I try to talk to people about is, people talk about innovation. You need innovation. And I actually have a very specific definition of innovation that's a little bit unique. I separate innovation from invention. I think that invention is something that never existed and is brand new to the world. Right. I think innovation is taking something from a different industry and applying it to your healthcare system, for example. And that is the way to advance, not by bringing up anything that's brand new, but taking things that already exist, that exists at Home Depot, that exists in your gardening system, and applying it to healthcare. So I think that as we go into these, difficult times, I think that there are tools that can allow us to be innovative. Frank, you talked about something that I think it was you actually, and I'm not 100% sure, because I was actually talking to my former chief medical officer, who's talking about the role that social media plays in advancing healthcare information.
Yes.
As the fact is that the CDC is shrinking, NIH is shrinking, NSF is shrinking, and so to disseminate information from one university to the other is more difficult. But this now affords the opportunity for the social media to organize into a peer-reviewed, self-voluntary peer review system that allows us to transmit the information. What's happening in Texas in terms of the measles crisis?
Right.
Okay. Maybe there aren't as many government feet on the ground, but there sure are a lot of clinicians who really, want to get this information out because they know, as most people do, that they don't have all the answers. And by giving it out to the crowd, we can all share, hey, have you thought about this? I observed this. We observed that.
Right.
I just want to digress just for another minute.
Sure.
You and I went through New York City during probably one of the worst epidemics in the history of the United States, the AIDS crisis.
Yes, during the 80s.
It took my friend, it took a lot of people, but I was talking to a lot of clinicians at the time, who were clinicians at the time, and what their first inkling about the AIDS epidemic was in 1979, 1980. This person died of a horse virus that doesn't kill anybody. That was unusual. Wow. Then 3 people died of a horse virus. Now it's like, well, now there's something going on. The normal mode to get information out is via the journal, peer-reviewed journals. With our social media, again, we got to make sure that the information is accurate. We can now get that information much faster to say, hey, there is something weird happening with virus mutations in this part of the country. Hey, you know what? Us in San Francisco, we noticed the same thing. And so it raises the flag. So crisis gives you an opportunity. And that's what we're trying to very quickly pivot toward. What can we do so that we can now continue to advance healthcare in light of a lot of these cuts and chaos?
Well, I can relate to that, especially with the COVID crisis, because it was around that time when I was literally watching other kinds of health conditions affecting my father in particular. He was recovering from cancer. And simultaneously, when I got COVID, it was during my 35th reunion, which was put on Zoom. And I had to my fever spiked in the first 5 minutes from 98.6 to 103. I had to say, happy 35, I'm going to sleep. I literally fell asleep for 15 hours afterwards. And the fevers, the fever that I had, as well as the virus, remember, there was no testing, there was no vaccines, there was nothing. It was literally March 20th when the city was shut down, and March 27th when I had that infection, if you will. And there I was. I had to lock myself away from my father getting it because he's on immunotherapy, and all I need is for the virus to make it ineffective, right? Or
That's
worse.
Right. That's
he
right.
He did actually test positive for the antibodies for COVID, so he was asymptomatic. So talk about miracles. But the
Wow.
thing is that I was like feeling this burden. How can I make any information out there to anyone to know what they need to do to prepare when in the COVID crisis and when there are no solutions out there currently?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so literally that was part of the inception of Frank. Well, I actually had been on Frank About Health before, talking mainly about epilepsy, but I wanted to come back and talk all about COVID. And I
Yeah.
really wanted to really do what you just stated, which is that when there is no information out there and a lot of stuff is being taken away, it's really saying that you, the individual, if you really want to make a change and help us all cope with what's going on in our healthcare system, you have to own all your own knowledge first and then share it.
Yeah.
It's community building. And
That,
that's the stuff that I guess the traditional health professions have never specified. They figure you're the patient and you've got your doctors. The doctors know what they're doing and you just take your medicine. Mm-mm.
yeah.
No, I think the most entrepreneurial profession to ever be in is healthcare.
Yeah. And Frank, going back to the whole, the COVID crisis,
Mm-hmm.
I was with a large molecular diagnostics company, and it was we did molecular diagnostics, we did immunoassay, we did chemistries. It was a large, large company, but we had a lot of people who were trying to understand, okay, this thing, COVID is happening. How can you diagnose COVID? And you know, all professions have their strengths and have their weaknesses. And the modality of testing, I learned that there were a lot of MDs who did not realize that the only way to diagnose COVID is through molecular testing. People thought that you can do it with immunology, you can do it with possibly hematology. What they didn't understand was something that you pointed out, which is that all takes time. The direct detection of an infectious agent can happen within hours to days. The immunological response takes days to weeks. And during those days to weeks, your R value, your branching ratio, you could spread it to, half the world by the time they figure out what you have. But the tools that were invented, ironically, they were invented when we were in high school, because Kerry Mullis won the Nobel Prize for PCR, which is a tool, back in, I believe it was 85. But again, it all goes back to having just a fundamental understanding and putting all the pieces together, which is what STEM education gives us.
Exactly. And now we're about to take our second break. So when we return, we're going to pivot the show in a more reflective direction, not just of the value that tech and STEM education has brought to you and I and to other people that we know that are also leaders in their respective fields, but we want to have a celebration of those individuals as pioneers in what they do, because the message, like I said earlier, is it really doesn't matter what school you went to, but Brooklyn Tech does the fundamental thing that is kind of unwritten. It builds community, and usually in times of chaos. So that all being said, everybody, please stay tuned right here on Frank About Health as we are celebrating the legacy of Brooklyn Technical High School, my 40th anniversary homecoming, as well as the 50th anniversary, class of 75. Any listeners out there? That's going to be celebrated in the special reunion dinner Saturday night. More details on that coming in the rest of the show. But in the meantime, we'll definitely get to promote all of our friends and everyone that has really had an impact on us in the past several decades. All right, everybody, we'll be back. Stay tuned.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on TalkRadio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on TalkRadio.nyc.
Hi, I'm Linda Marsanico. The A Train to Sedona is a memoir about my journey to love and compassion. It's also the name of my new broadcast on Wednesdays at 12 noon. When we are spiritual, we embrace possibilities and ideas, which strengthen our mind, body, spirit, health, and wisdom. On the A Train to Sedona broadcast, I plan to interview guests who embrace these expansive practices. Join us on Wednesdays at 12 noon on Talk Radio New York City.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. This segment I dub Legacy in Action. And the reason why I do is because we mentioned already some high-profile names. We mentioned Elizabeth Scabara, who was very instrumental in bringing me to the school and very instrumental in allowing me to participate in the centennial anniversary 2 years ago, actually, now 22. So that would be almost 3 years ago. But if anything, that was also our chance for the Zoom homecoming classes, 85, 86, 87, to all gather together and have our proper homecoming celebration. So indirectly, I already feel like I've had that massive homecoming thing. So I kind of feel bad about missing this weekend. But, you know, if anything, I'm doing this celebration as a way of contributing. Now, that being said, another person that we mentioned was Matthew Mandery. Matthew Mandery, as you and I both know, was very instrumental in bringing us together into the STEM Future World Vision Advisory Board, which we started around the time of the centennial, but more recently have really gotten more aggressive in terms of making sure that the middle school students out there are understanding the legacy that Brooklyn Tech has been building for over 100 years, but even more recently over the last 10 or 20. What do you think is, in your opinion, the reason for it being not so open that people have to discover it for themselves?
Well, that's a great question. I think a lot. So I think that it's always multifactorial. One is I think that when people think if you're in seventh, eighth grade, you're not really worried that much about high school. I think that you have to have a very special person at the middle school that can really help point you in the right direction. I see that in the school. I actually volunteer at a magnet middle school here in Southern California, and I see that they are very different because they have a teacher who just cares about the students and she does the extracurricular stuff. And I understand everyone's different, so don't mean to badmouth any other teacher, but unless you have that person kind of driving you, thinking about it in seventh and eighth grades, you're just not gonna think about it until it's too late.
Right.
So I think about STEM education. Sorry, there's a helicopter, so I'm gonna just pause for a second. Okay.
No problem.
Okay.
A piece of technology in action.
That's right. So I think of STEM education as a relay race that basically never ends, right?
I agree.
You have to be handed the baton, and we're talking about this segment that is defined by eighth grade, ninth grade to 12th grade, first year of college, and that handoff is critical as well. And so to be able to make even educators at the middle school aware of the opportunities at the specialized high school, whether it's Brooklyn Tech or Stuyvesant or Brock Science. There are now 10 specialized science high schools, and I'm sure every one of them contributes greatly to this idea that we want to be a more educated society, but we need the principals. I know that, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the name, who's on our committee, who's the principal at the middle school.
I know of the middle school. Eric?
Yeah. Eric, yes.
Yes.
We need people like him. And we need to find people like him and give him all the tools he needs to help motivate the student. But then the other part of the multifactorial is the parents.
Right.
So, I was fortunate that only my dad worked. My mom would stay at home. And so we had a lot of attention at home. But today, there are a lot of multi-families where there are, multi income people, mom and dad, right?
Yes.
And in fact, when I judged the the elementary school science fair projects here, you can see the difference in the quality of the presentation. So that's why when I talk to the student, I don't just grade them on the quality of the poster. I grade them on their knowledge. If they know what they're talking about, but the poster is not very good, it simply means that their parents are busy, but they are highly motivated and they need that extra attention. And so this future world vision that Matt Mandry and the rest of the team, who, everyone who's involved is really doing a service that we may not see the fruition of, because these are kids that are 10, 11, 12, who will need to then go through the next phase of the marathon, then through the college and so on before they have, but we're planting the seeds. And so that's really one of the advantages of, again, one of the things that I think is unique to Brooklyn Tech, high school, is the fact that we're looking in both directions. We're trying to educate the people we have and send them forward, but we're also trying to drive the motivated students into the environment so that they can get into this ecosystem.
That David Lee, class of 78, was on the alumni advisory board and got me also involved in the gala committee, basically said to me, think of Brooklyn Tech as pre-college. If it has all the 5,000 students in there, that's what you would find at an undergraduate arts and science college, on average. And then that was the only school back in the 80s that was offering a major in your junior year, which is what you usually do in college during your junior and senior years. You have a concentration, right? So already I could see how the Math Science Institute was very simplistic at age 15. Oh, well, I love math, so I'll do that. Not thinking of all the AP this and the physics that, and all of the things that actually, I believe, helped fostered my epilepsy. I had my very first seizure junior year at Brooklyn Tech while staying up all night trying to take a study for a calculus. So I don't know, maybe it was a hidden gift, because now I use my epilepsy as a foundation for trying to create healthcare awareness and advocacy. So there's always a reason for whatever you deal with. But I would say, again, it just takes the understanding that the seeds that you say, the seeds that were planted, I think everyone has to now learn, like, especially when you're in that type of educational system, or even in college, if you're in an Ivy League institution, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, Cornell, whatever it is, that you have to take ownership of what you're given and not depend on the system to provide you the awareness. Because people who remain, I don't know what the right word would be, not passive, just unaware, probably just waiting for someone to point on the shoulder and this is what you need to look at. That's just a missed opportunity.
That's right.
I guess that's what engineering really is. It's using the brain, which has its own trips and tracks and tools and techniques. And I mean, who knows, maybe one day a technical drawing class could actually draw the brain. I know they have computers that do that today, but the thing is that I think that Brooklyn Tech was a very deep secret in the 80s, and now it's been made aware of its viability, especially during times of chaos. But there's still, I guess, the comparison, is it a college or is it just a high school? And I think, if anything, the secret definition for any of the upcoming students, the current students, or even the alumni, is to understand that if it is too large and kind of fragmented, it's allowing you to develop entrepreneurialism and self-agency and self-advocacy. I think that is what makes anyone successful, no matter what school they go to, when you're aware of yourself first. So I think that's probably one of the secret lessons that Matthew Mandery himself tries to foster in the STEM committee, because remember, he is the only alumnus to actually be its principal. I mean, there's been principals after him, but none of them are alumni from Tech.
That's right.
So sometimes it's that special, real inherent investment in the role that you have that can really show the truth to people who, if they're lucky enough to resonate, it can really manifest even better opportunities in their career. I know when I went to MSI, or Math Science Institute, I was only focused on NYU, but it was that focus, that laser focus, that got me there under scholarship. So if I had thought, okay, you can focus on that, but also focus on the bigger picture at the same time, then you could say, and what are you going to do with that scholarship? And what is the career that you're going to build? if I knew then what I know now, it would have been entrepreneurialism all the way.
Yeah, no, I agree. Frank, and something else that I thought about, which is, kind of funny, but, the students today have a real advantage over you and I.
Mm-hmm.
What part of the city did you grow up in?
Here, New York City, Manhattan.
No, Manhattan. So how did you get to Tech?
By train.
So
and I had zero period.
We're talking about the early 80s when if the subway station had a light bulb working, it was good. It was graffiti everywhere.
Yeah.
I took the R or the double R at the time,
right.
The world's slowest subway train. I had friends.
Avenue Station.
Yes, DeKalb Avenue Station. I had friends who took the G, the double G, where it was dim. But that just shows you that these are kids, who are really motivated, who really want to, take advantage of the opportunity. Yes. Of course, I would much rather have the subway system as it is today back then. But but I can't help but think that it's something that we took for granted. It's just the way it was back then.
I guess if anything, it was like a lot of people did not have the foresight, even in our local government at that time. I mean, you remember what Fort Greene Park was? It was a haven for drug trafficking, which thank God is no longer the case. Now you can have a picnic lunch with people right there. And at the same time, there's a lot of condominiums that have built in the area. And now people are dying when they can't get into Brooklyn Tech. Not dying, but they're crying and feeling like they've missed their golden opportunity. But that's the danger. Associating institutions as part of your self-worth. Find your self-worth and apply it to the best institution that fits you. I think that's the biggest lesson.
Yeah.
We're in for our other break. I'm just going to give a few shout outs to some names of people I was going to mention more in detail during this segment, but it's about the legacy. Frank About Health could not have existed for almost 4 years now if it wasn't for the following Brooklyn Tech alumni. The Honorable Tanya R. Kennedy, who's featured in my documentary that I promise will see the light of day by the summer of this year. Simultaneously, she has been very instrumental in guiding me through difficulties in relation to my cousin, who's now in a nursing home. At the same time, if you remember, she and David Lee, along with my departed Retha Gray, were on a show a couple years ago celebrating Black History Month when we talked about social justice in healthcare. Then there's Solange Pilizzota, who was on my class of 85 as well. She was in my prefect. It was their word for homeroom at the time. And she and I would talk about autism. We would talk about cardiac care. And we also talked about mental health and PTSD. And then there was also Alex Yaroslavsky, class of 86, who appeared on Frank About Health to talk about how to use the limbic system to help regulate stress, actually to embrace stress as measures of the environments that you are in, especially in the workforce, and try to regulate your stress so you can have better negotiation skills. Either way, I learned from these people, just like the way we all learn from each other when we are networking with the right mindset. But in order to understand what that mindset is, you have to develop your own sense of your mindset first and reflect out, and versus being dependent on, because that's where you can end up making lots of mistakes. So that again are those 4 alumni are the ones. David Lee was involved with Tanya Kennedy. So that's 5 alumni that have been on Frank About Health, and as a result have helped me to build this show into a much bigger landscape, which you will hear about in the next segment as both David and I explore Dr. Marshall Runge, another pioneer and another leader that has used all of his own independent thinking and medical knowledge and academic knowledge as well, as we've been trying to hint at with Brooklyn Tech, to show all of you what the future can look like regardless of the high school that you're in. Plus, I'll also promote some of the events for this weekend's homecoming. Since I can't attend, maybe you can. All right, David, I think I've done all my promo for the moment. Now it's time for our break. All right, so we'll be back in a few. Stay tuned.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on TalkRadio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on TalkRadio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Hey everybody, the theme of this last segment of this episode is disrupting healthcare and building tomorrow. Because that's where I believe, like I said earlier to David, we have to be in charge of managing the chaos, especially when it comes to our healthcare and our quality of life. And I'm hoping that this podcast reflects that, especially over the next few weeks. Now, that's my intention. Therefore, by illustrating that, I've already given you an indication of the type of alumni that have already been on the show. And I also want to pay tribute to some of the other alumni that are leaders in healthcare. I don't have any knowledge of them personally or professionally, but this is what I found out, that I guess if any of you out there who are listening and know these people, these are tech knights that should be recognized. One such person is Dr. Jeffrey Canada, who's in charge of the Harlem Children's Zone, doing what he can to help people who are living a difficult lifestyle in poor communities and trying to get them adequate health care. Dr. Leon McDougall from Ohio State Wexner Medical Center. Dr. Lynn Holden, who is involved in mentorship in medicine. She's part of the Mount Sinai School of Medicine, Icon School. Either way, there are people from Brooklyn Tech in healthcare. It's just a secret. Not many people have known that. They've already known, like Lou Ferrigno, the Incredible Hulk, an alumnus from Brooklyn Tech, or they know people who've walked on the moon or who invented the digital camera. But of course, there is the Honorable Tanya Kennedy, who is always focused on healthcare, but mainly on social justice. You know, either way, I'm inspired by our alumni class, and yet it took me 40 years to actually realize that. But yet, when there is chaos, that's when you realize what you have in front of you.
And Frank, if I can add a couple of names,
Sure.
Some of my closest friends. So my wife, Lydia, works with autistic kids. One of my closest friends is Dr. Hamel Nayak. He's a cardiologist in Chicago. I also think he's an adjunct professor at University of Texas, San Antonio, I think.
Nice.
I know it's in Texas. We have another friend, Johanna Wang, who is working as a geriatric nurse, I think is her latest career. So there's a lot. And, most of these people started out at Tech as a chemistry major, but have branched off into healthcare. And I also have friends who started off at Tech who became president of Stanley Tool Asia, Yet Chin Hoi, graphic artist, Lei San Tong, and actually a museum curator at the Met. So
Nice.
Kirill McFarland. So had to throw in a couple of shout outs to my alum.
But, it's funny. You said earlier something very poignant, that a lot of us sometimes bring into the healthcare space what else we were studying. I mean, I went into business school, got my finance and marketing background. I love psychology, but I loved it as a hobby. I decided to study neuropsychology because of epilepsy. I had no idea what I was going to do about it. But yet I ended up taking all of my toolkit and realizing, let me build my business in healthcare, because my main driver besides psychology was marketing. So I had a company called MedCash, Community Action for Social Health. Meanwhile, it's now my holding company for my new company I've created for Frank About Health. and all of my other media assets, health e-media. So I am coming from the business of healthcare. But after all the advocacy work I've had to do for my cousin, my father, even myself, a part of me feels that I have to actually consider medical school, but only if they pay for it. I could afford it at this point
Yes.
in my life.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I noticed yesterday, I mean, I'm being very frank about this situation. You and I had this conversation earlier. I was with my father's doctor yesterday, and his
Right.
PSA level went up. And my normal instinctive reaction is, "Oh my God, what's happening?" But thanks to ChatGPT, I was able to see he's in due course.
Yeah.
So I would not have known that through any other channel other than my own research.
And
So that's the biggest lesson I'm hoping everyone here picks up.
Frank, unfortunately, we talk about the business of healthcare, and I actually recommend to a lot of my colleagues and the new people going up through the healthcare industry to actually take classes in business, because unfortunately, the economics of healthcare is a major driver.
Correct.
One of the things that we think about, and I think Dr. Runge will talk a lot more about it because he's the,
Absolutely.
but I
Perfect
know that
segue.
yes, but from my, from a medical devices point of view, a lot of time, one of the things we ask is, who's going to pay for the test? What's the reimbursement? If we do a test for disease Z, who's going to pay for it?
Right.
Somehow that seems wrong. If people are suffering from the disease, paying, who pays for it seems, like it should not be as high up as a make or break decision whether or not to develop a new test. So,
Right.
and I think Dr. Runge will talk more about the economics of healthcare. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, it's a perfect segue because the whole reason why he wasn't here today is because of budget cuts that are affecting his department.
Yeah.
And we all know where that's coming from, but it will be renamed nameless because this is not a political show. At the same time, he was saying, now I even want to be on your show even more because it's important that I get the word out there on his upcoming book on May 6th, I'm sorry, The Great Healthcare Disruption. What we are seeing is not only disruption with technologies and vaccines and medicines and the actual technology that is operated in the healthcare system, but we're seeing disruption and chaos from our social system.
Right.
And it's trying to make us take ownership over the whole thing during this transition, whether it's at the local level or the state level or the system level. Like I always talk about NYU Langone Health. And that's because it is a conglomeration of business and some politics and high technology, and not to mention number one in neurological health and transplants and other kinds of things. But yet, in the case of my cousin, I then explored New York Presbyterian. They're very big on cardiac health, Alzheimer's care and research. Then I'm also noticing the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. They were the ones to first issue the vaccines in New York City for COVID-19. So even hospital systems, I don't know if they get a bad rap because of ignorance or people not exploring it, but they just need to be able to provoke individuals to entrepreneurially seek their health care. And I think Dr. Runge will definitely issue that book kind of as a manual to help
Yeah.
guide us all in looking at how AI is going to be very instrumental across the board, from the business to the diagnosis to the potential cures. And it's just, I can't wait for him to be on the show. Everybody, he will definitely be on next week. And then I think I'm going to give away the secret right now. David and I will co-host him again on the 8th, where we will be promoting his book, which is on the streets that week. And it's going to be a very powerful, I would like to say interview, but it's going to be a very powerful campaign. Now, I see we are 2 minutes to ending. I want to pay tribute to one alumni that we lost from the class of 85. Her name is Mona Hassan Long, Mona Long. She died last year after a fundraising campaign to try to get her into hospice care for stomach cancer that eventually killed her after raising a lot of money for the treatment she needed, but it was just too far gone. And I was hoping that during the 40th homecoming to pay a special tribute to her personally, but since I will not be there, I'm putting it out there right now. I also, again, want to pay tribute to Elizabeth Scabara. She was not an alumnus from Tech, but she defined Tech's culture in many ways since the 70s. And these are powerful individuals in my life, as well as, I guess, in David's life as well,
Absolutely.
that you need to be inspired by the people you're with. You get to learn more about yourself, and then you really get the answers to your sometimes dark questions, especially when it comes to your health. And then I'm dedicating this show to my nephew, Colin Shear, who is entering his third year at Brooklyn Technical High School in September. He has chosen the law and society major. And even though I don't have him here right now, or I'm not able to see him over the weekend, uh, if he hears this, just know that I'm watching out for him so that he can take his skill set, which I know is strong, and make it as sharp as mine has become, because Brooklyn Tech definitely has been the type of institution that incubates talent, whether it's in the STEM fields, the health fields, or basic engineering. I do believe that. Do you have any closing thoughts before we end the evening?
Really, just one. I feel like we would be remiss not to again acknowledge the role of Matt Mandery in all of this. So again, he really is Mr. Brooklyn Tech. He graduated, was the only principal, and has single-handedly for many years driven the Alumni Association to what it's become now, with our very large endowment and all of these future looking programs. I really think that we would be a different organization. The alumni organization would be in a completely different place without the visionary and the passion and the drive of this one person, Matt Mandery. I think that one of the other thing that he's really been adept at is bringing people along with him to train the next generation of alumni leaders, as in yourself, Denise Ware, and many others who are, again, probably going to mess up. But so I think so I think Matt deserves all of the accolades for really what he's achieved. So
exactly. I agree. I was hoping to actually present him with a 40th class award, but when I already cleared that up with Denise, who you mentioned, she said he was already a principal, the class of 84, your class. So 40 years would not be the proper award. He should have gotten that last year. I think it was your year. He was the first year that he was principal. Am I correct?
Yes, he was the first year. I will, maybe a little bit of controversy. I know we're not supposed to get political, but New York is broken up into two groups. Are you a Met fan or a Yankee fan? I don't want to. Are you a Yankee fan or a Met fan?
Oh, Yankees.
Oh, see, I'm a Met fan, but
it's okay because I was happy for them when they won in '86.
That's right. But for the 40th anniversary last year, I gave him a Dodgers jersey. So anyway,
yeah, I'm getting the clue that it's time to end. Everybody, thanks for attending this episode of Frank About Health. Stay tuned next week with Dr. Marshall Runge and Phyllis Quinlan. Also, be aware, any of you out there that is looking to get to Brooklyn Tech, you've got Harvard University Medical Center looking at Brooklyn Tech alumni, which is Mass General Hospital. You've also got MIT, which is actually engineering. You've got Cornell because of New York Presbyterian, Weill Cornell rather, and of course there's NYU Langone. So that's my little collegiate play for everyone out there. Thank you, everybody. Stay tuned for the next show on TalkRadio.nyc. Thank you again, David, for being here. Thank you, Jesse, behind the scenes for engineering the show. And we'll see you next week. Take care.